Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Seb Randle. Seb, thank you so much for being with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks, mate. Really good to see you.
Good. And as always, we will start with the hardest question. In your own words, Seb, what makes you a man?
Oh, interesting. Do you know what? I actually don't really think about that particularly. I think I probably think more about what makes me a human. I think what's really important is to take an interest in other people who are very different from you, to show a bit of compassion, empathy, an awareness for the fact that it's not all just about me and people like me. This life is about learning about other people and people who might be very different from you. So taking a bit of time to be sort of compassionate and empathetic towards others, and also maybe getting to know yourself a little bit and who you are and what you stand for, because I think that can help you on in life quite a lot.
It's a nice way of looking at it, and that's sort of the idea behind the question. Really, is it's a question that men don't really ask themselves. So I want to ask it, but it's nice that you put it in a way that essentially says it's who you want to be and what you want to be, as in I'm a human. So Seb, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. So I run my own coaching consultancy called The Helpful Space, but I haven't always done this. My career was media and marketing, which I started back in 1999, which is mental that it was pre-millennium. And I absolutely loved my career. You know, it's the communications industry is really fun because you meet lots of interesting, dynamic people. Going back to what I was just saying about taking time to understand lots of different people who might be very different from you. And I worked my way up through ad agencies, and then I worked for a couple of big publishers, and absolutely loved it. But then, just pre-pandemic in 2018, I had a bit of a rethink about my career. I'd done 20 years in media and marketing by that point, and I kind of realised at that point that my priority was really people the whole time, not marketing, but people, and sort of understanding them, understanding how to get the best out of them. And I was also really interested in like the next wave of talent and who was coming through the ranks and how we could support those people to be the best version of themselves. So I set up my own consultancy, The Helpful Space. And whilst I was just at the start of that journey, I got spotted by Social Chain, who you might have heard of. It's the company that was founded by Stephen Bartlett. But the managing director over there saw that I was doing my coaching and said, "How do you fancy coming over and being our in-house coach at Social Chain?" Which was such an amazing time for me to go from one career kind of straight into another, really. And that's where I cut my teeth on coaching, where I started to understand how it could support people. And then 18 months ago, I decided to go solo with The Helpful Space and show other businesses kind of how it could support them.
Pandemic time seemed to be a changing point for a lot of people. Was there an event particular that sort of made you think about it? Was it just the space? What was that like?
Yeah, I think I was already contemplating it beforehand, but definitely the pandemic was a bit of a catalyst for it. I think a lot of people in that period just went into reflection mode because we were given that time, weren't we? A lot of people were put on furlough, for example, and we had that brilliant summer, if you remember. So it was like super hot, you're outside, enjoying yourself, probably in quite a decent space, I would say, to reflect, even though we had the pressure of what was going on. And I suppose, you know, these days to work in a career for 20 years is quite a long time. And, you know, people move around a lot more, don't they? And they sort of build on skills for a bit in one particular area, but then they can squiggle and move into something quite different. And I guess I felt that certain aspects of my character were being underutilized in my previous role, and I kind of it was moving a bit closer to my purpose, I suppose. And I knew within 2 or 3 weeks of actually being a coach that I'd made the right move, because there was something in me that was feeling a lot more content and fulfilled by what I was doing.
It was a strange time. Some people it was really hectic, and for other people they were sort of given that breathing space, which was nice. I was sort of in a combination of the two, really. I had a business and it was sort of going through a transition phase, and I just was trying to work out what to do with it, and it was a case of juggling it. But I also was able to enjoy that nice summer as well. I definitely do remember sitting in the garden and thinking about a few things. And yeah, it was an epiphany time for a lot of people. And it also, well, for me and for yourself, it's sort of like you say that. Almost like midlife, right? It was almost like a sped up midlife. Let's not say crisis, but essentially that side
Yeah.
of things. What would you say to someone who maybe didn't get the chance to have that journey through COVID and is now probably sort of maybe starting to think about things like this, or approaching that sort of midlife where you say, look, what is my purpose? How would you approach that with them?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing to acknowledge from that is that the space does you so much good, right? We were given that moment, and it was fortuitous, even though it was something pretty horrendous. But it gave us that space to think, and I think that's the first thing. You know, a lot of the conversations that I have are about our industry, which is so fast paced that people are just caught up on the hamster wheel of like moving forwards and chasing, chasing, chasing. And in actual fact, what you need to do is create a bit of space for yourself to actually contemplate what's important. I think the other really important stuff to do is to evaluate what it is that actually motivates you in your work. You know, is it the fact that you love taking responsibility for big projects, or you're a creative and that has to like run through everything that you do, or maybe it's change and variety and you don't like staying in the same place for too long. So you have to understand the reason for getting up and out of bed in the morning and going and doing your job in the first place. And that can sort of lay the foundation for what it is you then want to do. And also just thinking about values, you know, what is it that you value in life and how can they underpin your decision making? Because if you know that these certain things are important to you, they can help guide your decisions to ensure that you're always working towards that sort of end goal that's important for you. So I'll do a lot of stuff like that at the start of working with people to help them lay that important foundation that they can then build their ideas from.
It's a nice starting point. What's your views on not necessarily changing career? Because a lot of people, that's quite a scary thing to do, right? And there's been this huge influx of it's been labeled third space in the man world of like an alternate to work and home, and finding a purpose outside of that. Is that something that you've come across? Is that something that you've done in your own personal life? What does that look like for you?
It's interesting. I think there's it can work. It can work a number of ways, really. I think people can be more open-minded to changes in careers. I think a lot of people feel like this is the route that I've chosen and therefore I'm stuck. I mentioned the word squiggle before, and I think there's often opportunities for people to stay in businesses but to squiggle and stay. So maybe create a dialogue with the people that are managing them to say, look, you know, I see a place for myself here, but in terms of my own development, I'm looking to add this and this on, and therefore this other department might be interesting for me. I also agree with what you were just saying, which is about sometimes the things that you're seeking from a change in work can be achieved elsewhere. So maybe it's the fact that if you're looking for a bit more adventure or a bit more fun in your work, you can actually go and seek those things in your personal life or through hobbies, and almost like tick those things off in that respect, rather than having to fundamentally change, the direction of your career. So I think it's just about being quite malleable with how you think about it, and, laying out those things that are important and thinking, maybe I don't have to go down the conventional route to deliver those things. I could actually achieve them in another way.
Yeah, it's I like the word squiggle. That's quite a nice way of putting it. What was your squiggle from social chain to the helpful space? What does the helpful space offer now? What did you learn from that to create the helpful space?
Yeah, I think what became very clear to me, even though I'd set up my business name before I moved to Social Chain, it was quite fortuitous, really, because that was a young company, right? So the average age of the company of the people that worked there, sorry, was about 25, 26, something like that. And so my coaching was predominantly supporting people in their early to mid 20s. And obviously, coaching costs a bit of money. And historically, it's only been really accessible to people who are top tier leaders or people that have the privilege or the money to be able to access it. And what I noticed very, very quickly was that bringing a young person into a room for an hour, slowing them down, helping them to articulate their qualities, what they're good at, all of these different things was massively powerful. It's not something that many young people get to do. And so the helpful space, my strap line for that is democratizing coaching and making it accessible for everybody. That's what I want to do. I want to almost like change the image of coaching, because if you go on Google Images, for example, and you look up exec coach or something like that, you'll find probably a 40-50-year-old guy in an exec suit, kind of giving some business advice. And to me, that's not what coaching is. Coaching is helping you explore the fundamental parts of you so that you can act on those things in order to have a future that is more connected and gives you more fulfillment. And to be able to share that with young people is like such a privilege. And yeah, I feel really proud of what my business does.
The privilege is a big thing, right? You and I having this conversation right now is a privilege. The people that were working for Social Chain and the businesses that you work with now, it's a privilege to have you available and to use you. And for me, that's why I started this podcast. It was like, what can I create that's free, cheap, and accessible for all, so that they can start to build their building blocks. And it sounds like you've taken that a step further, and obviously, sorry, and offered a service, but still really got that core demographic there, which is really nice to see. What have you learned from coaching younger people?
Interesting question. I think I have learned a real deep appreciation of those generations below me. Gen Z is the generation really that I've been working with most closely. And it's given me a real insight into how I don't want to generalize because obviously everybody's quite different. But what I will say is that young 20 somethings have a bit of a crisis around confidence. And I find it quite interesting, like an interesting juxtaposition, the fact that we've got social media and we're encouraged to share our lives and put them out there in front of everybody. But at the same time, youngsters are very incapable of advocating for themselves. They find it really, really difficult. They find it really difficult to put themselves forward, even though there's a hell of a lot of entrepreneurialism and creativity. And the people that I've worked with, particularly through these types of businesses like Social Chain, are hugely creative and talented. But when it comes to actually selling themselves, there's a blocker. And I personally put it down to the fact that social media often tells you how to feel. It gives you quick fixes for how to think, how to feel, what to do. And almost it's like a guiding light that is not necessarily true. You have to go into yourself and do the inner work in order to really understand what's important for you. And I think a lot of youngsters these days don't do that because they've got this supposed support system out there. So it's taught me quite a lot about how we think, how different generations think. It's also taught me a bit about myself. I've naturally been a bit more reflective about who I am and what my sort of learnings have been, and what I want to take forward for my own future and development.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of speaking to all. I speak to a lot of old people, a lot of older people. Just weirdly, I don't really know how it comes about. It just happen to have those conversations, and I've not really gone down the other way yet, the other rabbit hole of the generation below, and started to have conversations there. But I think you can get learnings from anyone and everyone. It reminds me of when I first started one of my businesses, and I had a mentor, and he was talking about mentorship, and basically I said, oh, I can't be a mentor, I've been doing this for 2 weeks. And then he basically said, well, you've got all this skill set that you've done here, X, Y, and Z, so you actually can be a mentor because you have some knowledge in something that someone doesn't have. And it's not about age or wisdom, it's more about what you have done, I guess. It's an interesting one. What's your views on social media? I guess sort of our generation and the generation before, it was keeping up with the Joneses, whereas now we literally have keeping up with the Kardashians and that sort of external pressure of social media. How are people dealing with that?
I think it's a funny one because often the biggest challenge that people bring to me is I don't have time. So whenever we're talking about something, they'll say, I just don't have enough time because X, Y, Z. And I can be honest about my phone usage. It ranges from anything between 4.5 through to 7 hours a day that I'm using my phone. And probably, I don't know what proportion of that is on the likes of Instagram and LinkedIn, etc. But I can pretty much guarantee it's probably 75%, if not more. So we are all spending at least 2, 3, even 4 hours a day on these platforms. And yet we feel that we don't have time for these things that we supposedly care about. And for me, it's a case of people misplacing their priorities because they're stuck in a habit that is so compelling. Those types of habits to get that quick dopamine hit is just so powerful, but it's actually pulling people away from what it is they truly want to do and achieve. So I think there is a danger there. I mean, obviously there's lots of great content there for people to engage with, and that's it puts pressure on people to create a feed that is 100% supportive of their mental health and their dreams and their aspirations. And we all know that we all end up following things that don't do that. So it's a minefield, to be honest. It's an absolute minefield. I also say to people, our human minds haven't evolved for decades, for centuries, but the world that we live in is becoming more and more complex by the millisecond, with technology and the advancements that are out there. So, we're staying the same, but our environment is shifting. And that's what we have to have an awareness of, and we have to take back control of that.
I'm aware that you coach both men and women, right? And I was just wondering if any, is there a difference between the genders in the sort of problems that they're coming to you with? Is there?
Yeah, there is. What? So was very keen to make sure that my coaching was measurable. At the end of the day, I was working within a business, and the business wanted to know, that this coaching is working, that it's effective. And so it was really important for me to create some quite in-depth questionnaires, both pre and post questionnaires, to really understand how people are feeling. And on these questionnaires, I will ask people questions about their motivation levels, their confidence levels, what their work-life blend is like, how stressed they get, etc., etc. And then we'll go through the process of coaching. Then we'll see how those metrics have been influenced. And the bit that really interests me is that I will ask people, how well do you feel you're performing in your job on a scale of 1 to 10? Most people will score themselves somewhere between a 7 and a 9. Then later in the questionnaire, I'll ask them, how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your confidence? And they'll normally score that between a 3 and a 6. And it's much more obvious that, or it's much more severe, should we say, for females when it comes down to the confidence score in particular. So, and I would put that down to the fact that there is more pressure for women in the social media world in order to, fulfill a particular image or whatever that might be. And I think that pressure is often shown in how those people feel about themselves. So, yeah, in terms of confidence, I would definitely say that I see females coming to me for coaching with less confidence than the men.
Do you think that's linked to the rise of, I guess, feminism and the concept of having a career and having a family and essentially needing to do it all? Like, now that seems to be what social media, my view of social media from a woman's point of view, seems to be, is you have to do it all now.
Yeah, I think there is a pressure there, but then I think there's also an ambition for women to do it all because they haven't been allowed to do it all historically. I do a lot of work in this space actually. I'm a volunteer for an organization called Bloom, which is a female-led committee in the comms sector designed to up-level women in our industry because yes, we have lots of women in our industry, but maybe not in the roles, in those important top tier roles at times. And also, like, the intersectional experience of women isn't necessarily reflected in our industry. So there's definitely a move to sort of change that. And I think, yes, there's pressure on women, definitely, but also there's a lot of ambition for women to equalize things and ensure that they have the same opportunities that men do. So I think both things are kind of at play a little bit, really, and maybe that does put an extra pressure on them, which is why they're scoring themselves in that way. And also, I think they're coming up against more pressures in their everyday that maybe men don't take time to realize. I went to a panel event where they were talking about microaggressions in the workplace and how, for example, you can be sitting around a boardroom table and a female might share an idea to something and it gets bypassed. And then a little bit later in the meeting, maybe a guy would say the same idea and all of a sudden it's celebrated. And that seems to be a situation that many women can relate to. Coming back to like being a true man and thinking about how you can do that, it's about just taking a step back and observing exactly what's going on in the world and how you can use your privilege as a white, middle class, whatever guy in order to support those people who might not have had the same privilege as you.
Literally, yes, last night I did a lecture on pretty much this subject. It was the concept of beyond stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. So I did it with a lecturer at Staffordshire University who specialises in gender and primarily violence against women and girls, and we had an open conversation about this. And it was nice that you sort of wrapped that up with the how to be a true man, and that was one of the things that I was trying to address was the conversation, bringing men into the conversation, both from a how does it make you feel and a what can we do kind of thing, rather than just sort of being bystanders in this new world. It's essentially bring us in, right? Like it's exciting. It's cool. I use the example that if you get to the top now, you've got twice as much competition, so you're even better. So you've got to look at it from a positive point of view as a man, as well as a how can I sort of be supportive and do these things. So it was a
Definitely. That sounds great, by the way. I love the fact that you did that. And I think there's something else here about when you, as a man, start to understand your privilege a bit in a bit more granular detail. You start to there's actually a bit of discomfort that you go through because you start to realize a few things that maybe you've just taken for granted. And you also, as an ally, essentially, you start to reflect on maybe past behaviors, things you might have said that weren't necessarily the best, that might have made people feel uncomfortable, the way that you've dealt with certain situations. For example, I know that I've on occasion stood up and pointed at someone and shouted at them rather than, taking a bit of time to be a bit more mindful about what it was I wanted to say. And so you go through this process of learning as an ally. You start to realize the way that you've been, and you start to rectify some of those things, and you start to be a lot more intentional about doing things in the right way. And I would love for more men to understand the journey that you go on through actively being better and actively thinking about what an equitable future looks like, and how it can, yes, it benefits women because they have more opportunity, but it benefits men too, because it starts to affect things like parental leave and those types of things where you get to spend more time with your kids if you have kids, for example. So I think that's all part of the learning as well, for men to realize that there's something in it for them, the learning that comes through it, and also the outcomes like you were talking about.
Yeah, the question, what makes you a man, is sort of the reason that I ask it. Is it's changing, right? We're growing as a society, which is fantastic. It's arguably the best time ever to be a man. Maybe we've lost privilege, but we've been given opportunity, like you say, when it comes to parental or career. Pushing women into STEM and that side of things is good, because maybe I don't want to work in finance. In fact, I went down that route, worked in finance, did it for 18 months, hated it. But that was the way that I was thought I had to go, right? So it's changed. It works both ways, and that's sort of the idea of this conversation. Is that if you can bring men into that fold as well and show that it's an exciting time for them, arguably they're going to be more on board than feel like they're being attacked or having privilege taken away. So that's
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I totally buy into that. It's funny when you were talking then, I was just thinking about a men's group that I'm in called One Brotherhood, which is fantastic. It's such a great support network of men, and it's predominantly on, we connect to one another on WhatsApp, but then we have various events and stuff where we can speak face to face. And it's been enlightening being part of this men's group, because I've always been quite I guess, an emotionally in tune guy. I've got quite a lot of female friends. And so I don't really spend a whole load of time just in men's company. And on this group, we often talk about what's going on for us, what our challenges are, what we're trying to resolve in terms of our relationships or our futures and all those types of things. And it's amazing how many guys still feel that pressure to be what we would consider really a bit of an outdated man, being the provider and being all of these real things that are loaded with responsibility and pressure. And because I've not really been brought up that way, so I'm quite fortunate in that sense. I've not had that sort of conventional upbringing that would have raised me in that way, so I feel fortunate in that way to be able to think differently. But there's like you were just saying, it opens the floodgates of possibility for men just as much as it does for women to embrace all of this and to think, well, if women have equal opportunities in all domains of life, then so do we. We can be whatever we want to be.
Yeah, and that's something that's not talked about with feminism, and it's almost the most powerful defense for it. Is in a sense, it's like feminism is against the patriarchy, yet you say there's so many men, and I come across them as well, that are adamant that they need to be a provider, a protector, traditional in that side of things. And I say, it's really not economical anymore. Like, inflation's killed that dream for you, bud. Like, it's we're well past that. Unless you're in the top 1%, you're really going to struggle to do that. And even if you're there, it's still going to be pretty hard. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I'm trying to find a way to articulate it that doesn't make me, because I'm not a huge fan of the word ally, because again, I think that creates sides and this side of things, and I'm not for that. It's not a fight. It's not an argument. It's like, how do we rise up everyone together? And I just want the conversation to include men, which is weird to say. And like, even last night, I was still a bit like, I'm a man, there's women in the room, what can I say? Like, it was tough, and it's a challenge for me, and I'm trying to work out a way to articulate it. But you're right, there's so much more opportunity for men as well. And just to keep on the topic of men and that side of things, using you as a coach and that side of things, what are some of the tools that men can maybe implement to start opening themselves up?
I think a big thing for men is friendships. Investing in your friendships and spending real time with your guys, your trusted guys, being open and not just necessarily, I'm not saying everyone has to have deep and meaningfuls all the time, but people are more receptive to what you have to say than you actually think. That feeling of being listened to and supported and heard and is fantastic. And we all need to practice being better listeners as well for the people around us. If we're the ones who are seeking that support and those friendships from men, we have to think, well, how can we offer that in return to men and to our friends? And it's just about checking in with them more often, asking how people feel. And I think there's a lot to be gained by men spending a bit more time investing in those important people. That's such a great starting point. Aside from that, it would be some of the things that I've already mentioned around understanding what motivates you, what your values are, just trying to get a bit more of an understanding of what sits within you, and also taking the pressure off yourself. You don't have to have all the answers straight away. Bring a bit of an exploratory mindset to it, where it's about discovery. You might discover some really exciting and interesting things about yourself that you didn't know before.
It's funny to link it back to when you say men have usually put a higher score for confidence. I think men are really bad listeners because we always think we have the answer. So if someone says something, we instantly want to go, I have a solution for that. Is it the solution? Probably not, but you're so confident that it's the solution that you just want to tell them and say, this is how I would do that. And I think that's sort of where that stem of confidence comes from, is that we just think we have a solution to something. And yeah, that's a real skill that I think men lack, is just listen and just absorb what the person's saying rather than trying to find a solution, which is, yeah, a tough one really if you look at it like that.
Listen to hear, don't listen to respond. Men are fixers. They like to fix things and jump in, like you say, with solutions. And there's so much value to be had in just acknowledging how somebody is feeling, just sitting with them and showing that you care enough to just be with them in that moment. That is often enough for some people. We should be learning as well to find the answers to the big challenges for ourselves, because we don't always want to have a coach. For example, a coach should be able to help somebody find those answers within themselves, so that at a future date, when that coach isn't there and that same problem arises, they can bring those things in. So, it's not always helpful to try and fix people, because we should be sort of there to support those people in finding their own answers to the challenges that they've got.
Yeah, I think that just sort of all ties into a person's well-being, right? Is like, if you can create the tools and you can have those for yourself, and you can use a coach as and when. I think you said you don't have to have all the answers right away. I don't think you ever have to have all the answers. It's life, right? It's exciting, it's new, everything's different, it's always a change. And being able to have some tools, whether it's through a coach occasionally or stuff that you find online and stuff that you develop yourself through conversations, that's all powerful to allow you to continue to ask questions and continue to grow. Is that something that you're seeing now? Are people more open and receptive to it? And is that giving them more confidence and better mental well-being? What are some of the results from the coaching?
Yeah, I think just going back to the metrics, first of all, and how people scored themselves against those certain things. When you train to be a coach, you're not really taught how to evidence success of coaching, because it's a human thing, right? It's obviously, you get testimonials from clients if they've had a good experience, but you don't really analyze it too much until you start coaching within a business like I was doing. So it was really valuable for me to think about that. And just in terms of those metrics that I mentioned to you, all the metrics that you would want to go up, like motivation, confidence, work-life balance, they all went up between 16 and 23% across my first cohort of clients, which was about 20 people. All the ones you wanted to come down came down between 6 and 9%. So it was clear. I had no idea what those scores were going to be like. For all I knew, we were going to go through the process of coaching and maybe nothing had changed. But that wasn't the case, and it was consistent across those people. So coaching allows people to find more answers to problems, challenges that they might ordinarily have had. It allows them to see more about themselves and what they offer people and what they bring to situations. It allows them to advocate more for themselves, so that people can bring opportunities to them. If you know what it is that you offer and you can articulate it, people are going to come to you with, those things that they want you to sort of work on or solve or whatever. So this is consistently what coaching gives people. But then you might have, bigger things that people were working towards, or, challenges, whether it was like straightforward things like progressing to be a head of team, which somebody did, or running a London marathon, which was something that they thought was completely beyond them. So coaching can help with those specific big goals that you might have for yourself, or it can help in those sort of like general ways where it's just arming you to be bigger and better and more confident.
What do you think is missing, or what do you think there needs to be more of in the overarching mental well-being space?
Interesting. I think when we look at businesses, because I do a lot of my work through businesses rather than individuals, and what I think needs to happen is there need to be more people focused roles that exist across the business rather than within a department. We need to be finding ways to like build a coaching approach through a business, for example. All the things that we're talking about, like how to ask better questions or how to understand your qualities better, if they were built into the fabric of an organization and how it operated, then a lot of these problems and challenges that we're experiencing at the moment would be a bit more preventable. So I think that there's often HR teams come under scrutiny because ultimately they're not bringing in revenue for a business. They can be the first ones to come under fire or to lose resource because of the fact that they're not part of the bottom line in terms of how a business is performing, but they're actually saving businesses a hell of a lot of money. If you look at my retention of coaching clients within that business versus the number of people who actually left that didn't come to coaching, the proportional difference was massive. So it's about recognizing the value that people in people roles deliver and trying to breed those across a business as opposed to just being segmented. That's probably one of the biggest things I would say.
It definitely will help with retention. And just to sort of summarize what you were saying about being in a career for 20 years, it'll increase that. Like now that is shorter than ever, the amount of time people stay with a company or within a career. So if you can facilitate that within a business, you'll save a lot of costs on recruitment and retention, like you say, which is great. Seb, if everyone has enjoyed what you have said, where is the best place to find you? And where can people find more?
Yeah, no problem. I am the helpful space on most platforms. So I have a business page on LinkedIn, but also obviously I'm on there as Seb Randle as well, and similarly on Instagram. Those are my two main areas where I talk about the things that are important for my business or share ways of thinking or ways that people can help to sort of better themselves or whatever it might be. So, and I'm always open to people DMing me with a voice note or whatever it might be. That might be how we first made contact. Can't quite remember. If people want to do that, they're more than welcome.
Amazing. Seb, thank you so much for your time. I will leave you with your final thoughts and final words.
Final thoughts is don't shy away from exploring a bit more about who you are and what you stand for. And also don't feel like it has to lead to some big, grand, like revelation at the end. Just bring that exploratory mindset and have fun with understanding a little bit more about who you are so that you can offer a bit more value in the world.